All right, welcome everybody to this evening's Ask an Expert event. We're excited to have you here. My name is Neek. I'm the Education Programs Manager for Grand StaircaseEscalante Partners. We are a nonprofit organization committed to supporting and promoting Grand StaircaseEscalante National Monument and its scientific and cultural resources. We share monument science through educational programs, we carry out restoration and monitoring projects, and we advocate for land management policies that support the biodiversity of this region. We're very excited to have a chance to nerd out about soil tonight. And our Ask an Expert Q&A series is meant to connect you with experts who have worked in the Grand StaircaseEscalante region and are expanding our understanding of these landscapes and ecosystems. Before we hear from tonight's guest, I wanted to just give a quick review of how you can ask questions. So if you bring your mouse to the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see a few icons. One of them says Q&A and has a couple bubbles there. If you press on that, it's going to open a little window where you can submit questions. This is probably the easiest way for us to field your questions. And if you have any logistical issues as well, feel free to drop them into the Q&A box and I will respond to you. If you're feeling really excited about speaking, we also have the option for you to ask a question live. So if you'd like to do that, you click on the raise your hand icon. That'll indicate to me that you have raised your hand, and I'll give you an opportunity to come off mute and ask your question. So with that, our guest tonight is Raven Chavez, who is the soil scientist for Grand StaircaseEscalante National Monument here in Kanab, Utah. She has degrees in both soil science and natural resources and began her career in 2015 with USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service Soil Survey. She began working for the monument in 2019 and focuses on vegetation and soil monitoring, as well as soil, water, and air projects across GSENM. And what we're going to do is we're going to give Raven a chance to share a little bit about her work and, you know, get our brains a little bit warmed up and ready to go on this topic. And then we will start pitching her some questions.
All right, thank you, Neek. Like she said, my name is Raven Chavez, and I am the soil scientist for Grand StaircaseEscalante National Monument. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. I can get it to work.
Hey, Raven, we are not hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
It's in and out. Kind of like we hear you and then it cuts out and then we hear you and
then. Okay, I'm gonna screen share again and see if it just works.
Yeah, maybe you just like don't move around a lot.
Okay, I won't.
Get up close and
personal. I'll stop moving. Okay, so just to give you guys an idea, kind of just the basics of soil science. Most people just say it's the study of soil, but it's also the study of the biology, chemistry, and physical properties within soils, as well as the distribution, genesis, and morphology of soil. And that second part just meaning how a soil was created and what its story was over time. So my background is I have 2 bachelor's degrees, one in soil science and the other in natural resources. And out of college, I began working for Natural Resources Conservation Service Soil Survey, which is under USDA. My first job was out of Dickinson, North Dakota, so in eastern North Dakota. And then I eventually transferred over to Miles City, Montana, which is eastern Montana. It's kind of just like, it's not mountainous like western Montana. It's very much just the plains And that's actually where this picture is from, out in the plains in Montana. So as of 2019, I've been working for the Bureau of Land Management, Grand StaircaseEscalante National Monument. So almost 3 years now. And kind of my main role is I am the soil, water, and air program lead for the whole office. And on top of that, I also lead our assessment, inventory, and monitoring program, also known as AIM, for those of you who've heard it before. It's essentially what we're doing is we're monitoring vegetation as well as soils all across BLM public lands. I also help co-lead our salinity program that BLM has. It's mainly to prevent salts or additional salts from getting into the Colorado River. And then also I try to do as much outreach and education as possible, not only in soils, but other natural resources. So I'll get called on to do geology and then hydrology as well. So that's just a little bit about me, kind of get you thinking about what I do. And I guess I'm ready for questions.
All right. So again, you can drop your questions in with the Q&A. The first question for you is, what inspired you to get into this field?
Well, I grew up in Las Vegas, and my first 2 years of college were at UNLV, and I thought I was going to become a dentist. And I ended up taking a geology class for some reason, and I loved it. And I had a really great professor that I really vibed well with, and he kind of convinced me to take other natural resources courses. And so there are very few at UNLV, but I took an environmental science class and really enjoyed it and felt like I was good at it, and it kind of came easy in a way. And so from there, I decided to transfer to Oregon State University, where they have a lot more natural resources options. And I started off with a natural resources degree, which is very broad, and I had to take a soils class. And someone named James Cassidy, who is the bass player for Information Society, it's like an 80s band. You probably heard some of their songs. He was my Soils 101 professor, and it was just a blast. And I don't know if I'd like to think I would have gone with soils anyways if he wasn't my professor, but it really just, he was really good at grabbing your attention, and I just ran with it from there. I really enjoyed the people. I enjoyed learning about soils. It was something I didn't know soil science was a thing until I went to Oregon State, and I just kind of ran with it.
Nice. Yeah, sometimes it's that like one teacher or mentor that can make all the difference. Can you tell us a little bit about the AIM program or process and why we do it, or why you do it?
Okay, so AIM, that is a program throughout all of BLM. So all of the Western states are collecting AIM data. And really what that data shows us is we collect baseline data on our vegetation and soils. And then from there, as the years go on, we're then able to revisit those sites that we're collecting data off of, and from there assessing trend over time. So we're seeing what our public lands, what kind of, I guess, health they're in at the time. And then also, are they getting healthier or are they not, within a 5 to 10 year period. So it also just creates consistency across all of BLM, because there are a bunch of different types of monitoring programs that are slightly more subjective and don't really allow us to quantify, quote unquote, the health of a rangeland or the health of our public lands. And that's what AIM was created for. So pretty much every office has an AIM project going on, whether that's collecting baseline data or trend data over time.
Great, thank you. And here's a question somewhat related to that from Sarah. What do you look for when you assess the health of soil within the monument?
Starting off with NRCS, soil health is kind of a new topic. A lot of it has to do with soil biology, which we know very little about. It's like what we know about space. We know very little about soil biology. So soil health is this new idea that our soils can either be healthy or they can be sick. So when we're looking to see if we have a healthy soil, we're looking at structures, so we're physical components of a soil, structure and color. A lot of times when we have darker soils, that means you have a lot more organic matter, which tends to mean more biology and then a healthier soil, depending on where you're at. We also look at chemistry like pH, and we look at, do we have calcium carbonate present? Going back to the structure, are we supposed to have a really nice, kind of square blocky structure, or do we have compacted flat platey structure? Usually when we have that platey structure and we have livestock or wildlife in an area, or we have people driving, off road where they're not supposed to be, that's when we get platey compacted structure. And then we know that's not super healthy for our soil, because then that affects, water infiltration as well as wind and water erosion. So we're really looking at all aspects of what makes up a soil and seeing if it's as true to its original state as it can be. Or have we as humans or have livestock or other wildlife or other means changed it to a degree that it's not functioning as it should?
Okay, great, thanks. We have a question for Richard, or from Richard. Are you involved in any desalination facilities?
I'm not involved with any facilities specifically, but what we do, I can kind of elaborate on our salinity program. And what we're doing there is we get funding from Congress to try and prevent additional salts from entering into the watershed. So here at the monument, what we're doing right now is we have salinity ponds, which kind of look like livestock cow ponds. And what happens is when it rains, the sediment then flows into these ponds and settles, and that's capturing the salts and the sediment, and then that's removed. And we're able to calculate that, and USGS actually does a whole model for it each year, letting us know, how many tons are being removed from the potential watershed every year. The other way you can help, or we can help kind of prevent salts from entering Colorado, is also through vegetation treatments. We don't necessarily do that, and I don't know too much about that, but that is also an option that some offices take.
Great, thank you. And now I have actually two different questions that came in, but they're kind of on a similar topic. So one of the questions was, is the soil in the monument unique or typical of similar desert environments? And the similar question was, what is special about the soil resources in GSENM, and what significance do they have for the overall ecology?
Okay, so there are all types of soils out here, and a lot of people who are out in the area, I mean, you could just see it with the geology. When you have a different geology, you're going to have different types of soils. So there's a lot of variability out here, from Kanab all the way out to Boulder in the Circle Cliffs. I would venture to say that a lot of these soils are fairly similar to what I was seeing in eastern Montana. Actually, productivity is way different, whether that's because of mineral content or climate, but the soils are fairly similar in composition, if that kind of makes sense. But out here, what we've got relating it to ecology are the biological soil crusts, which is another component of my position that I work with. Um, I'm not trained in that, but I have learned a lot over the last 3 years, and they're pretty amazing for those of you who have seen really nice pinnacled biological soil crusts. So just kind of a little explanation of what those are. Um, you've probably seen them and maybe not noticed them, maybe thought it was just debris on the ground. A lot of times it's just black, kind of looks like black specks kind of blanketing the soil. And that's what they're doing. They're blanketing, whether it be moss, lichen, and cyanobacteria. That's essentially what makes up a biological soil crust, all those together or those separately. So what they do out here, and the reason why they're really important, is they blanket the soil and they help with water infiltration. So they help increase water infiltration, and they also help prevent wind and water erosion. So essentially thinking of literally putting a blanket on top of the ground, and if it stays on the ground and is hooked in there and it gets windy, that soil is going to stay there, at least a little bit more than the surrounding soil that isn't covered.
And we actually have a related question to that. How long does it take for damaged soil crust to recover?
It depends on how old the soil crust is. We have examples where we've done veg treatments, and then we'll go assess trend on those treatments each year after, and you can see what I would call cyanobacteria coming back within about a year or two. Usually by year 3, you can definitely see them. But if you had lichen, moss, and cyanobacteria, and there are these large raised pinnacles on the soil, that's going to take 50 plus years to grow back. That'll take a while.
Wow. Yeah. How can we, as visitors to the monument, recognize different types of soils and protect the soil while visiting the monument?
So how can you recognize different types of soil?
Yeah.
Well, the easiest thing for most people to do is just look at color. I mean, you can see when you're around different soils, either color of the soil or vegetation. And a lot of times that takes a trained eye. I've learned that the hard way, taking, say, interns out in the field and trying to show them things, and they stare at me and they go, I literally don't see anything. And to me, it's just like popping out and I just see it. So you kind of have to hone in, your eye for detail over time. But if you stop and smell the roses every once in a while when you're on a trail, you'll start to notice those little things and those little changes. As for protecting soils, we always ask, you stay on the trail as much as possible. Avoid soil crusts. You say if you're going to the bathroom and have to get off the trail, try not to step on them. If you do notice them, just kind of leave them alone, and just don't make a huge mark. Leave no trace. That's what we say.
Great. Thanks. Okay, so our next question goes a little bit further afield from the monument, but Samuel says, what is the EPA doing with issues of toxic waste dumps, like the radioactive waste dump site located in Carlsbad, New Mexico? How are they resolving the issues of leakage from drums stored at these sites?
That's actually a really good question. I do not have any experience with soil remediation, but from what I do know, so out here, out on the Arizona Strip, just south of Kanab, they have I think it's an old uranium mine. And what they're trying to do is place biological soil crusts on it. So they're actually planting, like growing them in a lab and then planting them in this old mine area and seeing if they'll grow and if they'll help speed up you know, bringing the soil structure back and bringing the whole site back to its proper, function. But other than that, that's about all the experience I have. They could potentially be flushing. A lot of times they'll try and flush the soil. That typically, I mean, that'll remove salts. But other than that, I'm not sure if they're having to use other chemicals or whatnot for things like that.
That soil crust thing that's pretty interesting. Is there like a precedent for using soil crust for remediation, or are
I
they
think it's just
forging new territory?
I think it's because soil crust used to be there and it's such
Mm,
a disturbed site. If you've ever been out there, it's pretty destroyed. And so they're just trying to get it back quicker. And
mhm,
also the whole soil, or not the soil, the biological soil crust inoculation idea. So taking crust from the outdoors, maybe in an area where they're going to build homes. So the USGS can go out there and pick up those biocrusts instead of them just destroying them. They'll pick them up, take them back to a lab, and try to grow them, like keep them alive. And then they'll take them elsewhere where maybe
mhm,
they've been destroyed and we're trying to restore an area. And so that's a new idea there.
mhm. That's
Um,
really interesting.
yeah, so that's what they're doing at the moment, as well as placing things on the ground that'll help capture sediment and
Mhm.
whatnot, so there's not so much erosion going on, and seeing if that'll allow the biocrust to grow a little quicker. Those are pretty long-term projects though,
Right.
because they do grow pretty slow.
Slowly. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, are there any sites on the monument that are in need of soil remediation?
But you could say a lot of our areas that have social trails, that's actually something we're trying to work on.
Hmm.
Soils get torn up, the topsoil gets removed really easily when people create social trails. I guess one interesting fact is that it takes about 500 to 700 years to create 1 inch of topsoil. And then it takes one, huge rainstorm or something to get rid of it, you know?
Hmm.
So really trying to teach people to be responsible on trails and when they're recreating helps a lot. And in the meantime, though, we can put signs up telling people not to go into this area, or it's a restoration area. And in that case, if you're just focusing on soils and not biological soil crusts, the best thing you can do is to just leave it alone and do its
Hmm.
thing. Most of the time, that's the best thing you can do, is just not touch it.
Gotcha.
It doesn't like being touched.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Richard. Why are, in quotations, invasive earthworm species a problem?
Invasive earthworm species. So I've never heard of them really be a problem. That would be something new to me. I know we like earthworms, even though I'm pretty sure none of them are native to the US. Someone can
Interesting.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure none of them are. There might be one that's native, and that's it. But what earthworms do is they're now part of the soil biology. And maybe there is an issue with them and we just don't understand that yet, because we really don't know that much about soil biology. But they definitely help out. They eat soil, that's what they do, and then they poop it out, and it helps soil aggregate together. And typically when you have earthworms, you have a pretty healthy soil a lot of times,
Hmm.
because they need that organic matter to survive.
Gotcha. Our next question is from Ellen. What is the most important thing for visitors and people who contribute to the management of GSCNM to know about soil?
Hmm. Well, being a soil scientist, I guess the first thing I want to say is that without it, none of us would be here, you know? Like we need it to survive. And some people don't believe that. But in reality, we really do need it. It provides us with our clothes, it provides us with toilet paper. A lot of people don't realize they wouldn't have their face masks or their makeup without soil. It's important, you know, just for us to get food and shelter. So having a basic understanding that it's actually, it sounds boring to a lot of people, but it's actually pretty interesting. I wish I could take everyone out in the field and I could dig a
Yeah,
soil
me
pit
too.
for them, because there's some really beautiful soils and some really cool things you see out in the field when you actually dig in the ground. So I really do wish that people had an understanding that we need it and we need to take care of it. We need to push others to take care of it as well. Um, and just having kind of an understanding that it does not like to be touched. It really doesn't. It doesn't like being disturbed. A lot of times, you know, tilling the land is kind of a history that the US, well, really the world has with soil and agriculture, but that they're slowly finding new ways to not disturb it as much and to keep it healthier.
Hmm. What are some of the biggest threats to soil health in our area, like on the monument and adjacent areas?
So on the monument, really, I mean, the lack of precipitation we've had lately is pretty
Mm,
bad for it. So that coupled with disturbance,
hmm.
whether that be human or wildlife or livestock, I mean, that's essentially what started the Dust Bowl in the 1920s and
Right.
1930s, was a lack of water and way too much disturbance and poor management of the land. And we see some of that. I don't know, I couldn't give you numbers on what our air quality has looked like, but some places still have dust storms, which isn't great. Like it's not, it's
Hmm.
something we can get rid of or at least decrease if we take better care of the land. Off of the monument, yes, private land is private land, and it's hard for us to really, if a landowner doesn't really care or doesn't know to care or just doesn't want to go through the process of trying to take better care of their land, that affects us too. Because then we have, wind and water erosion either coming into our public lands or into our cities, as well as, dust storms could happen. That's another big deal, especially out here in the desert where it's so dry and we haven't had a monsoon in
Hmm.
2.5 years, potentially going to be 3 years. It's hard when there's not that soil moisture out here.
Hmm. Great, thank you. Are there any specific plants that are at risk in the monument because of soil conditions?
Not well. One way you can think of it, those who are familiar with the vegetation treatments some offices do. So removing PJ or pinyon juniper trees, as well as thinning of sagebrush. It's kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg. Why are we having? Are the soils poor because this vegetation has moved in, or is the vegetation moving in because the soils are poor? If that makes sense, it's kind of
Hmm.
hard to wrap your brain around it sometimes, but that's the only thing I can really think of, and that it's hard to really form a solid opinion on that, at least the way I see it, because there's a lot of short-term research projects on those veg treatments and not a lot of long term.
Hmm. So still a
And
lot of questions.
yeah, there are a lot of questions to be answered. And yeah,
Great.
that's all I'll say
Thanks.
about that.
Our next question is from Mike, who says, does AIM or any of your other monitoring techniques look at trends of organic content in soils? And if so, are there places on the monument where organic content is increasing?
We currently do not have anything that we're doing on the monument to measure organics. That's something we definitely could do, but on average, if you look at organic matter that's found within soil profiles in the NRCS soil survey, I think from what I've seen, it's mostly around the 0.7% to 1% range in the topsoil. When you go up to Eastern Montana or North Dakota, you've got like 3 to 5% organic matter, which shows in the vegetation that's here and the not the diversity, but in the amount of vegetation we have. And also, and really it is the type of vegetation as well. I've seen people who want to increase organic matter in soil in areas like this. I just don't know if that's the answer, because are we meant to be like North Dakota? You know, this is a different climate. This is a different area. It's feeding different animals. It, in my opinion, it needs to just function the way it's meant to function. But we could definitely look at, you know, kind of like AIM setting a baseline or seeing what our baseline is. And then over time, seeing is our organic matter that's already low even decreasing even more.
Great, thank you. Our next question is from John, who asks, in this period of a warming climate, how can we best determine whether restoration goals represent sustainable results in an ecosystem?
That's an interesting question, and it's a tough question. We don't have too much, at least that I know of, climate science going on in the actual monument. One thing I can speak to on that is that same thing, USGS is starting to pull biological soil crust from, I'm trying to think if it's getting warmer. So they're pulling biological soil crust from a different elevation and bringing them down. Okay, from lower elevations up to higher elevations. That's what they're doing. So they're trying to see if it does warm up, will these different species down in the lower elevations be able to thrive in the higher elevations, where it'll then be as warm as it used to be in that lower elevation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I
don't know.
understand. I understand.
Okay, I don't know if I'm communicating that well enough. But they're starting to look at that and actually trying to kind of be proactive in understanding what's actually going to happen to these species when it does warm up. Because you're correct, we could be doing all this work, you know, again, using veg treatments as another example, when in reality, maybe it's just nature's way of telling us, too bad, like so sad, the climate's changing and the ground's going to change too. That's another, it's hard because it's another thing where it's, you know, you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants with that research. And it's long term. Again, it's long term research, not short term.
Great, thank you. So we do have a couple of questions about the relationship between domestic livestock and soil crusts or soil health. I know it's a sensitive topic, so but I do want to give you the opportunity to talk about that if you wish.
Okay, I'll go for it.
Okay, yeah, so it's just two questions discussing the impact. Please discuss the impact of domestic livestock on soil crust, and are we incorporating what we know about soil health to inform how grazing happens on the monument?
Okay, so just like if we were to walk on soil crust, when livestock walk on it, it hurts it. It's just like, it's disturbance. There's no getting around it. It is disturbance. You also get disturbance from, deer and elk and rabbits as well. I mean, really, we're a multiple use agency, so livestock are going to be out on the ground, but it is our job to let them out on the ground responsibly. So to the second question, I think I've brought a different perspective on soils because I came from NRCS and I was so ingrained in this soil health movement there. And I've been slowly trying to figure out how to incorporate that into soils on public lands because it's different. With NRCS, I was working with farmers and ranchers who are disturbing the soil pretty much every year. Same thing. They're either tilling it and they're planting, monocultures, or they have livestock out on the range. So we were trying to improve soil health there in those ways with them. So that's something I have been working on, is trying to, communicate with my coworkers about soil health and seeing how that information can potentially change how we're going to manage our allotments in the future. I'm still like barely touching the surface on that though, but it is something that's important and I would like to somehow incorporate it into our public lands.
Yeah, thank you. We're glad you're here. Do you have any, so we have a question from Craig. What are the water situation forecasts for the monument in the next few years? What do we know? What do we not know?
I think we don't know a lot. Someone told me today that they were modeling that we have a 30% chance of getting a monsoon, 30% of not getting one, and 30% of it just being super dry. Like they're updating these models all the time. So I don't know if someone just didn't want to actually run their models and just gave us 30, 30, 30 on everything. But it's hard to predict what's going to happen. But I think
Right.
it doesn't hurt to assume the worst and go from there. It doesn't look great though. Like, I mean, it doesn't. Like
Yeah.
anywhere, it really doesn't look good, especially in the Southwest. You see
Right.
like Powell's, I don't even know at what percentage full it's at right now. It's crazy. It's ridiculously low.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
What are some of the I don't know, concerns, things we might expect in terms of changes? I know you talked a little bit about like dust bowls and things, but is there anything else that we sort of need to keep on our radar as we come into this kind of drier, increasingly drier normal? Sorry, I feel like this is a dark topic.
I know.
Sorry, everybody. I'm sorry.
Yeah. The hard thing is, if the worst possible thing that would happen is that people would have to start moving out of the Southwest. It actually, I mean, we'd have to, or else we'd be bringing water in from elsewhere. Yeah, because the land can't sustain us the way we're living on it now and managing it now if it continues to get drier.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, on the topic of water, but moving out of the Southwest, Richard asks, any aquifer problems in Montana and the Dakotas, especially if there is fracking in those states?
Any what problems?
Aquifer problems.
So I fortunately or unfortunately didn't have to deal too much with kind of the oil field country out there. But what I did see were, you would see leaks that were happening from pipelines in, private landowners' crops. and they would have these huge circles of just black, like the corn had started soaking up the oil, and it would just all be black. And so you have things like that happening there, which, you know, it means that water quality is going to decrease, because eventually, I mean, that's going to hit your groundwater at some point. Another thing that they have out there, and it's both natural and man-made, just depending on how you manage the land, is they have saline seeps. And it's where the water is moving through the geology. So say you have a hill slope and you have this impermeable piece of geology or rock in the middle of it. If you get the water and it hits that rock and it's salty in that area, the water moves horizontally. And if you're on a hill, it eventually exits the hill. And then at the bottom of this hill, you all of a sudden have these saline seeps, and they're super salty and they can be really big. So that's something that they deal with out there as well. I'm not quite sure how that affects the aquifer, but it definitely affects, you know, the surface groundwater and how the soils interact with vegetation, because pretty much nothing can grow there when that happens.
Thanks. Our next question is from Mike, who asks, can you talk about how soils are different in riparian areas and how we might best manage these unique areas on the monument for optimal soil health?
So what I would assume in riparian areas is that the soil is typically, you know, you have more organic matter there, and it'll essentially be healthier, what we would consider healthier, depending on how those riparian areas are managed. A lot of times they're deeper soils, they're darker soils with a lot more organic matter. And I mean, you can usually see in a riparian area, you get the riparian vegetation. It's typically greener, as long as people or livestock aren't completely destroying it. In out here, I mean, soil is life, and we all know that. So it's really important that we do take care of those areas. I was out just this past Friday with a few people, and we were looking at some springs, and you could see an area that was fenced off. You could see all the cattails and all the vegetation, how tall it was. I mean, it was taller than we were. And then you have this fence line comparison where you have people driving through, you have cattle just eating all of, all the vegetation because it's so green compared to everything else they're eating out here. And it's just completely chomped down. There's probably half an inch of grass on that side. And, that's a really good comparison right there to see, if the vegetation is being affected that way, so are the soils. Really, the best way to fix something like that is to fence it off so that people and livestock can't get in there, at least as often, because it's such a precious resource when you're out in the middle of the desert that any living thing is going to want to go in there and either collect water or eat the vegetation, and eventually it's going to get overused.
Yeah, water is life, man.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the next question is, what do you love most about this field of work?
Strangely enough, I think I love doing field work and teaching people out in the field. I always thought of myself as an anti-person, but the reality is, and especially kids, like I used to just not want to be around them. And now I love taking people out in the field and teaching them about soils, like no matter what age they are, especially if they're interested. I've even gotten people who didn't care at all interested, because you start seeing like it's so different down there. It's kind of an artsy science. A lot of it's visual, and people, I mean, we like seeing things, right? So it helps to see different colors and to see different rocks and textures and things like that. But that's part of the AIM program is we contract out crews to come collect that data for us. And they always dig a soil pit, which is the hardest thing for most people. Because again, it's like I said earlier, you really have to be able to see detail in order to catch these things. And yeah, I just love taking them out and actually teaching them how to, correctly horizonate and, see different components within the soil. And also kids, I like bringing a bucket with worms and soil in it and just passing it around the room, and everyone freaks out, and it's fun. It's like a party science almost. It's just
Ooh, a
fun.
party science. You are
Yeah.
selling it, Raven. I want to go
I
out in the field
know.
with you and learn how to see like a soil scientist, and you should
Get
come
to
to our
play in the
science camp.
dirt.
Yeah,
Yeah,
play
it's
with dirt.
great.
I guess it doesn't get any better. And then we have another question from John. What is your favorite thing to do when you're not working?
When I'm not working, I want to say hike, because that's what I just do all the time, like
Yeah.
before work, after work, and then on the weekends.
Yeah.
And I just like going out and exploring, really. Unfortunately, I can never turn the soil's brain off. It's kind of like you get,
How is that unfortunate? I feel like that's a great thing.
I don't know, because sometimes I would like to go hike and not think, oh, or figure it out. This was formed this way. And that's, you have like this X-ray vision that you can't really turn off ever.
Cool. I should go hiking with you more often.
Yeah.
Great. And we have an update actually from Craig, who got some data about Lake Powell, just to go back to that not so fun topic. Lake Powell is 138 feet below full pool. By content, Lake Powell is 34.66% of the full pool and is down 46 feet from 1 year ago. And now I just feel really bad that I reported that information, because we were on such a happy topic about hiking and the party science. But I did want to share that, and thank you, Craig, for pulling that up for us.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing to be aware of, honestly,
Mhm.
because at the same time, they're talking about building a pipeline to take water from Lake Powell to St. George when there's no water there anyway.
Mhm.
So it's good to be aware.
Be aware.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, oh, I was about to say we wrapped it up, but we just got one more question. So here we are. Samuel says, the depletion of our water sources is a huge issue these days because of farming, waste, recreation, and many other determining factors that affect the amount of water available to us as inhabitants of this earth. What's your opinion about draining lakes into the aquifer to keep our water source from evaporation? And should we be concerned about evaporation?
You should be concerned about evaporation because it does happen. It's something we're concerned about when we build livestock and wildlife troughs out here. Those are much smaller, pools of water. It kind of goes back to kind of doom and gloom, honestly. And I won't really get too high on my soapbox on it, but the reality is, energy cycles all throughout the world, right? Through our atmosphere, through the water, through us, through wildlife. And there's only so much energy I think that humans can take up. And there are a lot of us. We're consuming a lot of energy right now. So, and that's why we built dams and, our held up water is because we needed that energy, right? So at some point, as humans, we're not going to have enough energy, or the world's not going to have enough energy to provide for us. I know that sounds terrible, but one day our dams might not hold anything, whether they're there or not. They might not have anything to hold. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's like, I don't know what else to say about that, but
Well,
it's-
I appreciate your realism, right? Like I appreciate that, you know, at some point I think we do have to acknowledge our energy use and our water situation. But nonetheless, soil science, very cool. Now that you call it a party science, I am like really ready to be at the party. And I really hope we can continue learning from you in the future. So yeah, just a huge thank you to Raven. Comments are coming in. They love you. You're great. And really great to be able to weave in and out of these topics with you. And we really appreciate your time.
Yes,
And
thank
to
you.
the audience, thank you for coming out. We're always happy to have you for these Q&As. And we hope to see you at some of our upcoming events. All right. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you.